At first, it seemed impossible. Washington and Tokyo, allies tested by decades, military bases, joint programs, coordination at every level of security, an economy tied together by thousands of invisible threads. And yet now, headlines in the world's biggest media outlets increasingly carry words that until recently sounded absurd: a crisis in US-Japan relations. The Financial Times writes of an unprecedented rift between allies. Nikkei warns of a systemic threat to Asia-Pacific stability, and Reuters sources inside the Japanese government admit trust in Donald Trump is collapsing fast. The reason is simple, yet catastrophic in its consequences: a trade war launched by the White House against its largest ally in Asia. It all began with tariffs. Trump, back in the White House under the slogan "America First," once again reached for his favorite tool of pressure: duties. If China had once been his primary target, this time the blow landed on Japan. Cars, electronics, steel, household appliances. Trump sharply raised tariffs in these sectors, explaining it as a response to unfair advantages of Japanese corporations. While such rhetoric sounded familiar to an American audience, in Tokyo it came as a shock. For the first time in decades, a US president openly showed disrespect to an ally whose economy had long helped sustain the balance of the American market. In a closed parliamentary session, according to Asahi Shimbun, Japan's prime minister declared, "If the US treats us as an adversary, we are forced to defend ourselves as an adversary." That phrase became a turning point. Tokyo's response did not take long. Measures once considered unthinkable suddenly entered the discussion. According to Bloomberg, the Japanese government is weighing a package of restrictions on exports to the US of strategically important goods. One of the first items, fish, especially tuna. To the American public, this may sound abstract, but experts know Japanese tuna holds a central place in the US food industry. Sushi bars, premium restaurants, supply chains on the West Coast all depend on Japanese imports. According to the US Department of Agriculture, more than 70% of premium-grade tuna comes directly from Japan. And now that tap could be shut off. Nikkei reports that the government already has a phased plan on the table, first capping export quotas, then a total ban if Washington refuses to back off its tariff policy. But fish is only the beginning. According to insiders who spoke to the Wall Street Journal, Tokyo is preparing a far more serious step: selling off part of its US treasuries. Today, Japan remains one of the largest holders of US government debt, with over $1 trillion worth of bonds. This is the country's primary financial weapon, both shield and sword. If Tokyo pulls that trigger, the consequences would be devastating. Even modest Japanese sell-offs could trigger panic in the US bond market, driving up rates, eroding confidence in the dollar, and unleashing a new wave of crisis. Washington understands this, but Trump appears to be deliberately raising the stakes. On his Truth Social account, he recently wrote, "America will no longer feed other countries. For too long, we have allowed Japan to exploit our markets. Starting today, we put America first." In Tokyo, these words were taken as a public humiliation. Japanese politicians privately called Trump unpredictable and dangerous, while a former ambassador to the US told NHK bluntly, "This style of leadership destroys the foundation of trust that took decades to build." Meanwhile, China is acting quietly, but effectively. According to the South China Morning Post, closed-door consultations have already taken place between Chinese and Japanese officials on energy and currency settlements. Beijing clearly understands. The weakening of US-Japan ties opens a historic window of opportunity, and if Washington continues down this path, Japan may turn decisively toward China. This would be a catastrophe for the United States, a country whose economy for decades served as the backbone of American interests in Asia could find itself pulled into Beijing's orbit. Inside Japan itself, the debate is intensifying. According to a Yomiuri Shimbun poll, more than 42% of citizens believe that the alliance with the US no longer guarantees security. This is the highest figure in the past 20 years, and younger voters are increasingly looking toward China, which offers investment, market access, and technological partnerships without humiliating conditions. Economists are already comparing the current situation to what happened in the early 2010s, when China restricted rare earth metal exports to Japan. Back then, it was a warning shot. Now, it is Japan that is preparing the signal, but this time against the US. For Washington, this is a nightmare scenario. Losing Japan's trust means not just economic troubles, but a strategic blow. The entire Pacific Alliance, the whole framework of containing China, rests on the US-Japan partnership. If that collapses, the balance of power in the region would shift instantly. South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, all would be forced to reconsider their positions, and China would gain not just an economic partner, but a world-class military ally. Meanwhile, according to the Financial Times, Japanese funds have already begun quietly reducing their holdings of US treasuries. The volumes are still small, but the trend is clear. Investors speak of diversification, of risk reduction, but everyone understands. This is a signal. Japan is ready to play hard, and if Trump continues his current policy, the process may become irreversible. The irony is that America itself is pushing its ally into China's embrace. The louder Washington speaks of making America great, the faster its alliances crumble. And now Japan, the country that for decades symbolized loyalty to the US, may be the first to change course. And if tuna supplies really are cut off, if Japanese bonds start being sold en masse, then the crisis in US-Japan relations will go down in history as one of the most dramatic turning points of the 21st century. For now, it may sound like a hypothesis, but when the Financial Times and Nikkei write about it, when sources inside Japan's government confirm restriction plans, and when investors record the first sales of American securities, this is no longer just rumor. It is a reality that could change the world. What is truly alarming for Washington is not only the question of fish or even the debt market. Far more serious is the fact that Tokyo has, for the first time, begun to discuss the possibility of targeting America's own vulnerable spot, the automobile industry. According to Nikkei, Japanese government circles are considering a scenario in which the country's largest automakers, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, gradually redirect their investments toward Asia, opening new plants not in the United States, but in Indonesia, India, or Vietnam. If this happens, the American market will lose tens of thousands of jobs, and automotive supply chains will be thrown into jeopardy. Economists at Goldman Sachs are already warning that a reduction in Japanese investment in the US auto industry could cut GDP by 1 percentage point within the next 3 years. This is precisely what is causing panic on Wall Street. Reuters reports that after the first news of potential Japanese restrictions, shares of US auto giants General Motors and Ford fell by more than 6%. Investors fear a repeat of the 1980s, when trade wars with Japan nearly wiped out entire industries in the United States. But the difference is that back then, Washington and Tokyo still managed to reach an agreement. Today, under Trump, compromise seems impossible. Finally, one must not forget the symbolic factor. According to the Financial Times, in the corridors of the IMF and the World Bank, discussions are already underway about Japan's readiness to support initiatives to expand BRICS+. For now, it is only about observer status, but the mere fact that such conversations are happening is enough to change the world picture. After all, just a year ago, no one could have imagined that America's closest ally would consider engaging with a platform that the White House dismisses as an alliance of losers. And if all this is put together, Trump's tariffs, the threat of cutting tuna supplies, the possible sell-off of American bonds, the reduction of investment in the auto industry, and Japan's cautious rapprochement with China, it becomes clear. The United States risks losing not just a partner, but the strategic foundation of its entire policy in Asia. The irony is that the initiator of this rupture has been the White House itself. History has already entered a phase where diplomacy turns into a struggle for survival. And if Donald Trump continues his current course, it may be he who goes down in textbooks as the president who destroyed the US-Japan alliance. The world will not be the same. And in this new world, Japan may well stand not beside the United States, but on the other side of the barricades.